We start with a point. Like the point we know from geometry, it has no size.
What's up, guys? It is Nick Angel. It is Sunday, January 24th, and this is Awake and Aware Sunday. What's going on, guys? I'm glad you guys are joining me. If you're just joining us, usually it takes a couple seconds for people to jump in the show when we go live. But tonight we are talking about the 11 dimensions of consciousness, or the 11 dimensions of reality, or 11 dimensions of quantum physics, because guess what? They're all the same thing. So, that's what we're doing tonight. We're talking about 11 dimensions. I know a lot of people are like, I know of 3 dimensions, like 3-dimensional, right? What's the 4th and 5th dimension about? And a lot of people, you hear a lot of people talking about in astrology and astronomy and those kinds of rooms. They talk about we're moving into 5D space and time. We're going to talk about what that means. And we're going to talk about all the way from the 1st to the 11th dimension. We're going to watch a little video. And so normally on the show, we talk about things that help you get through the day and increase your energy. And here we are, we're getting like super talking about physics. And why would we do that? Well, in the majority of my conversations in this past week, this question has been come up to me, and people have posed this. They're like, what is this 5 dimensions that we're moving into? What is everybody talking about when they're talking about 5D? So I thought it'd be really good if we just talked about the different dimensions of space and time, because they have an effect on us. They affect the way that we perceive reality, the way that we interact with reality, and then the potential. You know, we're all manifestors here, co-creators, and the co-creating that we do really has to do with the connection to multiple dimensions. And, you know, multiple dimensional reality is not something that hasn't been talked about. There used to be a television show called Quantum Leap. This is not science fiction. This is science, and it's not fiction at all. Like, this is reality, as well as backed up by verifiable proof. Now, when we get into the higher dimensions, of course, we're just imagining stuff because we can't really experience it in these bodies because we're in a lower dimensional state. And that'll be explained. So, I'm going to go ahead and roll the credits. Another interesting thing that's going to happen this week, is I'm not going to take this over to the podcast. And the reason being is because we're going to need visual aids to even understand this. This is not, a show that's going to be easily understood just by listening. You're going to need some visual aids. So I'm going to provide some visual aids to take a look at so we can get an understanding of some of these higher dimensions that we experience in our reality. So I'm going to go ahead and roll the intro here, and I'll be right back with you guys in just a second. I'm up. Wake up. All right. So if you guys are just joining me, we are talking about 11 dimensions, multiple dimensions, and the higher dimensions that we exist in. This is not science fiction we're talking about tonight. I'm going to show you guys so you can understand all the higher dimensions that we are connected, so you can see how you're connected to your higher self and other people and other places and other times, and how they kind of play a part in today's reality. So I kind of have this little video that I'm going to play and share with you guys that really explains it really well, and then we're going to talk about it. It's a 10-minute video, but we're going to talk about it as it goes along. It's an older video. I mean, it came out in 2007. It's on YouTube. I don't own the rights to it, so we're just going to play it and talk about it and have commentary about it, which is okay because we're just having a viewing party. I don't own the rights to it. I didn't create it. I just want to be clear about that, and I'll put the guy's name who created it in he's kind of gotten famous from this video and written a couple books about it since then, but he was just wanted to share this with his friends and family, just like I want to share it with the Awaken Aware community, because it makes a lot of sense. And even the scientific community embraced it. It's just a wonderful way of understanding higher dimensions. So let's bring this video up. Pull up my big screen here so that you guys can see. And we're going to talk about this video to know higher. It's called To Know 10 Dimensions. What's interesting, if you remember, guys, we mentioned that we're going to talk about 11 dimensions. So I'm even going to break it open a little bit past where he's talking about the 10th dimension, and we'll talk about the 11th dimension after this. So check it out. Let's see what we got. Imagining the 10th dimension.
We start with a point. Like the point we know from geometry, it has no size, no dimension. It's just an imaginary idea that indicates a position in a system. A second point, then.
So if you notice right over here, there's a point, just one point. That's where we're starting. That's the first dimension. So from all other dimensions spring from this point. And that what's interesting about that point is it's just a point in anywhere in time and space. It really doesn't even matter what it is. Everybody wants to know where the beginning is. But once you start to fathom the higher dimensions, you'll understand it really doesn't matter.
Can be used to indicate a different position. But it too is of indeterminate size. To create the first dimension, all we need is a line joining any 2 points. A first-dimensional object has length only, no width or depth.
Some of y'all out there like that.
If we now take our first-dimensional line and draw a second line crossing the first, we've entered the second dimension. The object we're representing now has a length and a width, but no depth. To help us with imagining the higher dimension.
You know anybody like that with no depth? Anyway, so where we're at right now, we got 2 points. Started with a point, started with another, and called that like a cross section. That's the only way that you could experience these 2 points. If you're at this point, the only thing you could experience is this higher point here, right? And if you're at this higher point, the only thing you could experience is this lower point here, because that's what you would be perceiving. That's what you would be looking at, touching, tasting, feeling. All your sensory perception would be that point, and this point's sensory. So you can't perceive yourself yet, interestingly enough. It actually talks about this in most journals of creation and biblical and religious and spiritual systems. It's not until we get to the third point.
Our second dimensional object is being created using a second line, which branches off from the first. Now let's imagine a race of two-dimensional creatures called flatlanders. What would it be like to be a flatlander living in their two-dimensional world? A two-dimensional creature would have only length and width, as if they were the royalty on an impossibly flat playing card. Picture this. A flatlander couldn't possibly have a digestive tract because the pipe from their mouth to their bottom would divide them into 2 pieces. And a flatlander trying to view our three-dimensional world would only be able to perceive shapes in two-dimensional cross-sections. A balloon, for instance, would start as a tiny dot, become a hollow circle which inexplicably grows to a certain size, then shrinks back to a dot before popping out of existence. And we three-dimensional human beings would seem very strange indeed to a flatlander. Imagining the third dimension is the easiest for us.
So what was interesting there is you notice there were 3 points to perceive 2 dimensions. There was 3 different points of reality to perceive 2 dimensions. And it's interesting. Like I'm not religious, but in the Bible, it talks about splitting, creating the heaven and the earth. And originally there was just God, then he created the firmament, or he created the heaven and the earth, or the heaven and the firmament. He split it in 2 different things. That's 3 points. In the beginning there was God, and then he created 2. So I'm just using that as an example of dimensions to recognize how they kind of coexist and one doesn't seem so spooky anymore, or so it's the same reality. To imagine 2 dimensions, 2 different dimensions, you have to be from a third point. Otherwise, you could only see the first dimension. It takes 2 points to see the first dimension, and it takes 3 points to see the second dimension. It's pretty interesting when you think about it, because most people would say, oh, it's just 2 points and for 2 dimensions, but it's not. So each dimension has one more point of view to experience the higher level. Often we call that first point self.
Because every moment of our lives, that's what we're in. A three-dimensional object has length, width, and height. But here's another way to describe the third dimension. If we imagine an ant walking across a newspaper which is lying on a table, we can pretend that the ant is a flatlander, walking along on a flat two-dimensional newspaper world. If that paper is now folded in the middle, we create a way for our flatlander ant to magically disappear from one position in his two-dimensional world and be instantly transported to another. We can imagine that we did this by taking a two-dimensional object and folding it through the dimension above, which is our third dimension. Once again, it'll be more convenient for us as we imagine the higher dimensions if we can think of the third dimension in this way. The third dimension is what you fold through to jump from one point to another in the dimension below. Okay, the first three dimensions can be described with these words: length, width, and depth.
All right, so the first three dimensions are depicted right here: length, width, and depth. Or there we go. I didn't practice, but anyway, length, height, width, and depth. Those are the first three dimensions. Those are the three dimensions that we know when we say three-dimensional space. That gives us what we are, who we feel what we are, and the spatial recognitions. Humans, you're going to probably think that we perceive in 3D, but we don't. And I'm going to show it to you in just a minute when we get to the fourth dimension. But we actually perceive in the fourth dimension. Remember, you need that extra point to see the dimensions below. So to see three-dimensionally, you have to be in the fourth dimension. That's where we exist at. Human beings, in our human experience, we exist at the higher levels too, but we'll get into that later. But in our normal day-to-day lives, we completely exist in the fourth dimension and below. When you're reaching out to something and grabbing it, and you have spatial representation that you can reach and grab something, that exists in three-dimensional space. Because that thing, if it were in a higher dimension, I would just reach right through it. I wouldn't be able to grab it, wouldn't be able to pull it down and tangibly be able to feel it because it exists in multiple spaces. The Earth is kind of like that, but we don't perceive it because it's moving really, really fast. It's actually all over the place. The Earth is like soup. It's not a physical thing. I know this is going to get kind of kooky for you guys, but I'm going to try to keep it real, real simple. So we're at three dimensions, perceiving from the point of the fourth dimension.
What word can we assign to the fourth dimension? One answer would be duration. If we think of ourselves as we were 1 minute ago, and then imagine ourselves as we are at this moment, the line we could draw from the 1 minute ago version to the right now version would be a line in the fourth dimension. If you were to see your body in the fourth dimension, you'd be like a long undulating snake, with your embryonic self at one end and your deceased self at the other. But because we live from moment to moment in the third dimension, we're like our second dimensional flatlanders. Just like that flatlander who can only see two-dimensional cross-sections of objects from the dimension above, we, as three-dimensional creatures, can only see three-dimensional cross-sections of our fourth-dimensional self. One of the most intriguing aspects of there being one dimension stacked on another is that down here in the dimensions below, we can be unaware of our motion in the dimensions above. Here's a simple example. If we make a Mobius strip, take a long strip of paper, add one twist to it and tape the ends together, and draw a line down the length of it, our line will eventually be on both sides of the paper before it meets back with itself. It appears, somewhat amazingly, that the strip has only one side, so it must be a representation of a two-dimensional object. And this means that a two-dimensional flatlander, traveling down the line we just drew, would end up back where they started without ever feeling like they had left the second dimension. In reality, they would be looping and twisting in the third dimension, even though to them it felt like they were traveling in a straight line. The fourth dimension, time, feels like a straight line to us, moving from the past to the future. But that straight line in the fourth dimension is, like the Mobius strip, actually twisting and turning in the dimension above. So the long undulating snake that is us will feel like it is moving in a straight line in the fourth dimension, but there will actually be, in the fifth dimension, a multitude of paths that we could branch to at any given moment.
Okay, right there. He just broke down the fifth dimension. So The fourth dimension is us perceiving ourselves where we're at right now. But from the fifth dimension, we can perceive ourselves as our young selves and our old selves at the same time. So this is what you've heard me mention in shows a couple shows ago. I talked about how we are still our young self. I commented on something the other day where somebody said, "Oh, you're so, you're the youngest one there," and I said, "No, I'm actually the oldest one there." And the truth of the matter is time's not linear. Time exists in kind of a twisted Mobius strip. In many Mobius strips, like this picture here depicts, this is a person who's showing themselves at different stages of different ages that are all connected to them. And what we call that is potential. In this reality, we call that potential reality, except in those realities, we are their potential reality. And this is where we get into the idea of multiple dimensions, except they all do exist. They really, really do. There's proof in every level of chemistry and quantum mechanics that this is how our reality works. And it fits all spiritual systems. It fits pretty much everything. So we got some new people joining us. If you're just joining us, I just want to let you know what we're talking about is the 11 dimensions of reality, consciousness, and time and space, et cetera, et cetera. We are now at the fifth dimension, breaking down the fact that in the first dimensions are length, height, width. The fourth dimension is time, and the fifth dimension is potential multiple realities. And they're not just potential. In this reality, they exist as potential because you can move to and from them, and conceivably can move to and from multiple realities of different time frames. I mean, you can move into a reality that has a different past and or move into a reality that has a different future. So I'm going to go ahead and plus pray. We're picking up from the fifth dimension.
Those branches will be influenced by our own choice, chance, and the actions of others. Quantum physics tells us that the subatomic particles that make up our world are collapsed from waves of probability simply by the act of observation. In the picture we are drawing for ourselves here, we can now start to see how each of us are collapsing the indeterminate wave of probable futures contained in the fifth dimension into the fourth dimensional line that we are experiencing as time. What if you wanted to go back into your own childhood and visit yourself? We can imagine.
So before answering that question, he said, what if you could go back in time and visit yourself? How many of you guys think that is possible? How many of you guys think that you could possibly do that? Remember, I can see you guys' comments. We are live. So if you got questions, thoughts, anything, throw it in the chat box. I can throw it up on screen. Everybody can see it. Awesome. Lauren Marie said, is that the same as the 12 lies that we are living in different dimension, or is that different? I would say it's different because this exists with or without us. Each of these dimensions are, so let me give you an example first off. In these bodies, we may live, for 100, 110 years. And what happens is that's a period of time. And what we're talking about, these dimensions are beyond time. So when we get to the higher dimensions, we'll understand more, but these dimensions are almost infinite. They expand through time and space. So their time relative to us is, you'd have to think in the realm of trillions of years, trillions and trillions of years versus 100 years. So we exist in them, yes. But what we're living in our life here is a little bit different. It's a fraction of what we'll get into and how many bubbles exist and how many levels of existence that really are and the weight of that. We'll keep going. But that's a good question, Lauren. Anybody else? Anybody else believe that you can go back in time and see your past self? Yes or no? Just pop a Y or N in the chat box. Do you believe that you can go back to your past self and see your younger child from where you are now? How about a yes or no? I guess none of you believe it. Well, it's possible. There we go. There's a yes. Awesome. So I believe that you can. But right now where we're at, science kind of says that there's no scientific technology that would allow you to do it currently, even in the thought process. Seeing your future self, yes, but your past self, you would need something special. You would need nature to help you, and then it's possible. We'll talk about that here.
Folding the fourth dimension through the fifth, jumping back through time and space to get there.
So let me back up for
to get
just
to the
a
world
second.
where, for example, but that straight line in the fourth dimension is, like the Mobius strip, actually twisting and turning in the dimension above. So the long undulating snake that is us will feel like it is moving in a straight line in the fourth dimension, but there will actually be, in the fifth dimension, a multitude of paths that we could branch to at any given moment. Those branches will be influenced by our own choice, chance, and the actions of others. Quantum physics tells us that the subatomic particles that make up our world are collapsed from waves of probabilities simply by the act of observation.
So we've talked about that on the show in the past. That's why I backed up. Is that reality changes as we observe it. There's proof in this in what's called the Pauli-Paulsen principle. It's where we shoot particles through two slits. And in those particles on the back wall, when they hit the wall, if we're not observing them, they're all over the place. They operate in a wave, just like you just saw. But when we observe them, they stop operating as waves and become particles and show up exactly where the slits are. And that proves that we actually affect not just the energy, because all things around us are made up of energy, but they're also made up of those particle electrons that make matter what it is. When those electrons aren't there, space becomes almost empty. You can't see it, doesn't exist. So behind you does not exist right now until you actually focus your attention. You don't have to look at it. Just focusing on your attention, the electrons jump from somewhere in space that could be 1 billion years away, jump behind you and create reality behind you. So we're always, it's the funniest thing. Like Esther Hicks says, we are on the leading edge of creation. And it's absolutely true. Everything seems real to you. You're totally, and everything is real to you as long as you're observing it.
In the picture we are drawing for ourselves here, we can now start to see how each of us are collapsing the indeterminate wave of probable futures contained in the fifth dimension into the fourth dimensional line that we are experiencing as time. What if you wanted to go back into your own childhood and visit yourself? We can imagine folding the fourth dimension through the fifth, jumping back through time and space to get there. But what if you wanted to get to the world where, for example, you had created a great invention as a child that by now had made you famous and rich? We can imagine our fourth dimensional selves branching out from our current moment into the fifth dimension. But no matter where you go from here, the great child inventor timeline is not one of the available options in your current version of time. You can't get there from here, no matter how much choice, chance, and the actions of others become involved. There are only two ways you could get to that world. One would be to travel back in time, somehow trigger the events that caused you to come up with your invention, then travel forward in the fifth dimension to see one of the possible new worlds that might have resulted. But that would be taking the long way. The shortcut we could take would involve us folding the fifth dimension through the sixth dimension, which allows us to instantly jump from our current position to a different fifth dimensional line.
All right, I got to stop there because we just mentioned the sixth dimension. And if any of you guys are kind of track, I know sometimes it's kind of hard to track because this is not our normal thought process. But if that sounded oddly familiar, because that's the storyline behind Back to the Future, where the guy goes back in time, affects himself by dealing with his mother and father before they met and almost erased himself. And so, these principles have been, that's a science fiction show or movie, but it was plucked right out of a science book, not science fiction book, but right out of a science book. That would be using, so a lot of times you may have heard breaking the fourth wall in movies where people kind of look out at the screen and look at the audience, to add emphasis, or the narrator talking to you. A narrator is breaking the fourth wall. And that is fifth dimensional movie. Like it knows that you exist in that movie. Now, if those were two realities, you can imagine there's a narrator or yourself narrating your time in your own mind. If you just perceive this and just in your imagination, you are actually, through your attention, your physical body doesn't have to go anywhere, but just using your imagination to ponder multiple dimensions takes you to these other dimensions. And you're affected by them. And it has an effect on your energy, your frequency, and your vibration. This is why often in the show we will do this thing called a perfect feeling thought, where you go to that place that is exactly what you want, that gives you the best feeling. Often it may include having copious amounts of money, prestige, fame, family, somebody back. But in your imagination, your focus takes you to a reality, even though that reality is at the quantum level in your thoughts and in your mind. It's still a real reality. And remember, because our attention, not just our visual, what we look at, our attention happens in our mind. Our attention creates realities. So you are creating a whole new dimension just by focusing your attention there. So yes, when you take time to ponder yourself doing well, when you take time to think of yourself in a better state or think of somebody in a better state, you're creating an energy field where that place and that actually exists. The reason you don't see it in your reality is because it exists in a different dimension. That's all there is to it. All of your thoughts exist in a different dimension. This is why every single thought that you have does not just show up in your reality, but I rest assured, all of your thoughts exist somewhere in some space, in some time. Thoughts actually have space. They have energy. They are real things. I hope somebody's mind is blown, because my mind is blown. All right, so I'm going to back up just a second here, because again, we're just getting from the fifth dimension, where a man, instead of going back in time to his young self, giving him information to become his better future self, says, forget that. He's just going to jump from here to here and just become his best self. And before the show is over, I'm going to tell you how you can do this to this, because this is what we call manifesting. This is law of attraction stuff right here. This is how the law of attraction works, is you come from where you are to a better version of yourself just using your thoughts. That's why we're talking about this today on the show. Let's go.
To a different fifth dimensional line. In our description of the fourth dimension, we imagine taking the dimension below and conceiving of it as a single point. The fourth dimension is a line which can join the universe as it was 1 minute ago to the universe as it is right now. Or in the biggest picture possible, we could say that the fourth dimension is a line which joins the Big Bang to one of the possible endings of our universe. Now, as we enter the seventh dimension, we're about to imagine a line which treats the entire sixth dimension as if it were a single point.
Ooh.
To do that, we have to imagine all the...
What'd he say? So right here, he suggests the seventh dimension, because remember, you're always in the dimension above looking at the dimension below. So to perceive the sixth dimension, you have to be in the seventh dimension, just like we're in the fourth dimension perceiving three dimensions. And to perceive time, that puts you in the fifth dimension, because remember, to perceive your older self, younger self, you have to be in the fifth dimension. And that's what happens is when we talk about coming into the fifth dimension, that's what we're doing, is we're now not just being part of time, we are perceiving time as our reality as well, along with the three dimensions below it. Moving into the sixth dimension, we are now perceiving ourselves, perceiving time. So moving into the seventh is no longer about ourselves. It's all of reality. What this is suggesting is from the beginning of all existence that we know on our time, on the timeline that we exist, from here, from the Big Bang to the end of the universe, the very end of that meaning where everything is destroyed. So from the beginning to the end, the alpha to the omega is the seventh dimension. So used to be, I used to read a lot of stuff where a lot of people believed that God existed in the seventh dimension. And so, not going to make this religious, but creation exists on all levels. So that would mean the creator exists on all levels as well. And then here's where we get into the multi-dimensional realities. So those other dimensional realities, we exist, you can perceive the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth reality. The seventh reality you can actually perceive too. Not in this body, because remember, we already know that the Big Bang happened millions of years ago. Your body did not exist millions of years ago. You also know that you're not going to be here millions of years from now in this body. Actually, you will be. You just don't realize it, that all of this stuff is taking place at the same time. The beginning of the universe is happening now. The end of the universe is happening now. And together, we live in between that, but we also live cross-sectionally from other realities. See, this is why we don't die. This is why we are eternal. This proves that eternal consciousness is real, because if for this to happen, to even perceive the beginning or the end, remember, you have to be in another point outside of that. So even though this existed the beginning of time to the end of time, to perceive any of it, we have to exist in a point outside of it. So for us to exist in the seventh dimension, which we all know that we exist in the seventh dimension, we actually are eighth dimensional beings. What? This is what makes us so powerful. This is why we are at the leading edge of creation. This is why we are co-creators. This is why we are master manifestors. This is why we create the realities around us. This is what the law of attraction is all about.
Line, which treats the entire sixth dimension as if it were a single point. To do that, we have to imagine all the possible timelines, which could have started from our Big Bang, joined to all the possible endings for our universe, a concept which we often refer to as infinity, and treat them all as a single point. So for us, a point in the seventh dimension would be infinity, all possible timelines, which could have or will have occurred from our Big Bang.
So, all possible realities from our timeline. That means your younger self, your older self, you dying at a young age, you dying at an extremely old age, every possible reality of everything that you could do that is about you is the seventh dimension. So basically your data file exists in the seventh dimension. It's like you storing information on your computer. All of who you are is stored in the seventh dimension. Your consciousness can pull up any of those. So before you come into your body, you exist in the seventh dimension. You say, your consciousness is up here in the seventh dimension now. This is where your consciousness lives. This is your consciousness that you drive home with. This is the consciousness that you walk with without thinking about putting one foot in front of the other. This is the consciousness that you brush your teeth with without busting your gums up. This is the consciousness that keeps you breathing while you're sleeping. Now, there's a physical aspect to that too, but that there's a part of your brain that regulates that. Your lower subconscious self can also do that. But I'm talking about the painting a picture and not thinking about it, or texting somebody while doing something, while driving. Like otherwise, you would just crash a car because you've changed your attention. That's part of, there's a physical aspect to that, but your true consciousness, this is the consciousness that I'm always talking about. This is your aware self. This is you being able to perceive yourself in all the lower dimensions, including time. I mean, if you just think about your memories, you can think of your younger self. Now, can you imagine your older self? Absolutely you can. You can imagine your older self in many different scenarios. That's because all those scenarios that you can imagine are possible scenarios from where you exist, and they do exist in multiple dimensions. Awesome. So Holly Rose Gosselin asked about the Akashic Records. So your personal Akashic record is the seventh dimension, but all Akashic, because remember, to perceive, to access the Akashic Records, you would have to be in a dimension higher than the Akashic Records. So for those who don't know, the Akashic Records are a record of all things that have happened in all timelines, in all existence that have to do with the earth. And also, so the earth exists and it's also connected to all universe around it. So what happened to you in a different dimension, what you've been in past lives, what you've been in this life, et cetera, that are all connected to your consciousness. This is why your past life records are as well in the seventh dimension, but you can't perceive them unless you're in the eighth dimension. So to access the Akashic Records, you couldn't do it from your 3D self. So this is why when we say lower vibrational people are missing all this stuff, and they may see glimpses of it, but that's going all the way back to what we call the Flatlanders earlier on in the video. They're two-dimensional people. They can only perceive what's in front of them. And I mean, no joke, no insult to anybody. Do you not know people like that? They only can deal with directly what's in front of them. They don't have any imagination. They're not visionaries. They don't daydream. It's just because they're two-dimensional people. Or actually, they're three-dimensional people, but only perceiving two-dimensional at a time. There are four-dimensional people that are constantly about the three dimensions. So you're all about money. Guess what? You're a fourth-dimensional person. Because what do we say? You can't take the money with you. You know that. Is money any good to a child? Nope. They can't get to the store to buy anything. So it's only for a period of time that it has any value to you. And so money people live in the fourth dimension. Fifth dimensional people moving up, these are your people who start to wake up when they can start to perceive themselves as being more than themselves, as well as seeing other people as more than themselves. At first, you may not perceive yourself as being another person. That's okay. But waking up into the fifth dimension is to recognize that we're all connected, that all other people are all just versions of you from your higher conscious self. The whole fifth dimension is you. Everybody that you've ever crossed paths with is you. The people that are having a conversation with me right now, we're the same person. We all exist in the same time frame. We all exist in the same dimensional space, which is just that dot right here. That's it. That is us. Now, when you recognize your consciousness exists outside of that, your consciousness exists outside of that and sees that whole thing as a dot and can access any part of it at any part of time, then you recognize we're all that. That's all of us. We're all that. That's all that we are. That's why it says infinity there. That's what that is that's all of us. So, this is why we want to love each other and take care of each other. It's like, why would you want yourself do you want to suffer? This is why we talk about the golden rule in so many different things. Maybe before the show up is I'll actually talk about the golden rule from many different religions and spiritual perspectives, because there's many different perspectives to that. But this is why our reality has so many different experiences. So if you guys are just joining us, we're talking about the 11 dimensions, and we just got up to the seventh dimension. Holly Rose asked a wonderful question. She talked about the Akashic Records also in the seventh dimension. Well, the data stores of the Akashic records are in the seventh dimension. But to access them, we actually go to our eighth dimensional self. And this is where we're at. We're in that meditative state. When we're jumping out of our bodies, when you're in an out-of-body experience, you're floating around somewhere in between the seventh and eighth dimension. So this is why you can access the Akashic Records in your non-physical form. And, you can bring back pieces of memories of accessing the Akashic Records in our 3D selves, but they're just memories. They're just slivers of information that we got. That's why we can't remember or recall all of existence and tell you exactly what Jerry Doohickey did in 1600s in Ireland, because I don't know. I didn't access it. But if I thought about Jerry Doohickey outside of my body, I would have a lot more information, and there's a chance I'd come back with a sliver in my memory. And when I say a sliver, it's just a two-dimensional memory. That's what memories are, is they are two-dimensional chemical etchings inside of your brain. This is one of the reasons that we age, is over time as our brain actually fills up from creating memories. And creating memories creates cortisol. Cortisol creates is the equivalence of stress. Holding on to memories is holding on to things. And when you hold on to things, you create stress. Stress creates cortisol, which creates space in between your physical reality. And that's why as we tend to get older, we all kinds of things, like we stretch out, we get wrinkly, so this is why in Buddhism they talk about attachment is the form of all suffering. All of this stuff that's spiritual has a scientific reality, like everything is real. And it's also just as illusionary. Like you guys can see this right here. I can't actually see this, but you guys can see that there's a dot here with an 8. I can't see that. It's a crazy thing. So my reality is different than your reality, but yet they all exist within that dot. And this is all perceivable realities exist in that dot. And we call that infinity. Now, here's the thing. There's more than one infinity. And that's what we're going to talk about. So that's what happens, is this is where this whole reality is the basis of every possible scenario. Every movie you've ever seen exists in here. Every thought you've ever had exists in here. Every species, every breath, every time, every date exists in that dot that we call infinity. And that's only just the 7th dimension. So Lauren says, where is psychic ability, mediumship, tarot, communication with other physically deceased consciously spirit, and astral projection? Okay, so first off, everything exists on multiple levels. It's only when we're perceiving things do they become into conscious reality. Conscious reality being you perceiving it. So the first dimension doesn't exist until you go into the second dimension and look at it. The third dimension doesn't exist until you look at it from the fourth dimension, so on and so on. So you can perceive any of these things from a higher dimension. So that means they exist in that higher dimension as well. So you could be in the 11th dimension perceiving all things, and psychic exists there, consciousness exists there. So consciousness exists all the way down to the first level. It's conscious of self is the first level. So this is funny when you start to recognize. I mentioned before, I kind of talked about quantumly what 1111 is and what time is, and how it's all just happening now. And so the first dimension is coming back down around. This is why we talk about the 10th dimension and the 11th dimension are just ones. They're just higher perceptions of the same thing. So when you get to the 11th dimension, it's actually just another dot. So all of these dimensions are just a dot. And so when you ask when does psychic ability and mediumship, it exists in all of them, except it is just more defined in the higher dimensions. So there's psychic ability in the first dimension. Knowing of self is in the first dimension, because that's the only thing you can know is yourself. You can't perceive anything else. It's not until you step into the second dimension that you can even perceive your true self, your outside self. It's only within yourself in the first dimension. The second dimension allows you to perceive yourself from the outside dimension. And this is why you'll hear people in Hermetics talking about, or alchemy and Hermetics, they talk about the creator having divided himself. And this is where a lot of people use the whole idea of good and evil, but it's absolutely not that. It's not even light and dark, because those things didn't even exist yet. But when he divided himself, it was to experience himself, to see himself. That's the creator. So yes, if you haven't picked up on it yet, a lot of the starts, if you're not noticing, the suggestion is all saying that we are all connected. We are all one. But then also that you're creator, you are also the part of the creator. You are the creative aspect of the creator, but you're also the observer of the creator. So you're observing all of the creations. See, now, when you're in the first point, you're the creator. When you're in the second point, you're the observer of the creator. But guess what? The observer is also the creator too. So my friend Kim asked me a question last night about if we are our lower thoughts. And she was like, is that just our ego, or are we those thoughts? And so your higher self is the observer, but you're even higher than that is the observer of the observer. And so on, you will see that there are many observers. All things that observe are also you, and all things that create are also you too. You just don't perceive them because where you're at as we exist in these bodies are 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional, 5-dimensional beings, and they're only perceiving downward, not upward. They're perceiving the dimensions below them. When you start to perceive yourself as a 6th-dimensional being, then as a 5th-dimensional being, that's when you start to perceive what we call in the lower dimensions psychic realities. And those psychic realities are being able to see distance, like scrying or remote viewing, or mediumship, connecting to something that may not be in this dimension of time and space, right? Because you're taking your consciousness to a higher dimensional space that's perceiving everything and the connections. Let me fix this mic here for a second, because there we go. It's getting a little wonky there. But I don't know why it keeps bouncing. That's that's funny. But as we perceive, all of those things are connected, all different times and spaces. So as you move on to a new space where somebody has passed, that person is still exist in another time and dimension, but are still connected to all of them. So when you leave your body, you are connected to all energy of all time and space. So yes, you can talk to dead people. Yes, you can perceive yourself as flying. Yes, when you leave your body, you're no longer bound by the physical laws only exist in the lower dimensions because they affect length, height, width, and depth and time, but time's not relative or outside of or it is relative. It's a different form of relativity once you get past the 4th dimension. But that's Einstein's only talking about the 4th dimension when he's talking about his whole theory of relativity. Actually, he's talking about the 5th dimension, excuse me. He's talking about perceiving the 4th dimension. So awesome. So Lauren said that's what she's talking about, more so or less. So yes, our the abilities that we talk about that are normal, that are, when we say ESP, extrasensory perceptions, when we talk about psychic, I've experienced all of these things at one point in time in my life, are because I consciously dabble in higher dimensions. And remember, you can go into a higher dimensional state and spend 1 million years in, say, the 7th or 8th dimension, and then come back in your consciousness to where you're at right now. So doing that, which means you can go to any conscious time frame that you've ever existed, meaning you're conscious at a lower, younger age, and your consciousness goes there. The difference, though, and this is why you have memories of adult style things. You think almost as an adult, even as a child, even though your faculties are not there. That's because your brain isn't developed, and your brain is the lower functioning stuff. How to walk, how to tie your shoes. You don't think, you know how to do those things in your higher conscious self. You know how shoes were invented. The second you think of shoes, you know everything about shoes when you're outside of this physical 4D space. Everything. Where every shoe was ever made. That's one idea. So the funny thing is we think of thoughts as coming out from our brain. I was also asked this question this week here. Thoughts exist in the 7th dimension. So when you're accessing thoughts, you're in the 8th dimension. They trickle down all the way down to the lower dimensionals into your 4-dimensional self, where your memories exist. Your memories exist in 4D. You access your memories in 5D. So this is why we have limited set. This is why memory is so difficult for most people to try. Oh man, why can't I memorize that? Like, I know it. I was there. Or how come that somebody just told me a telephone number and I could only remember 4 digits of it or the first 3? That's why. So you're moving through space and time, but yet the memory is behind you in another time. And you have to go spend energy to go back into that time to pull back that memory. That's what we call string theory, folks. All right, so I'm going to move on here. So right here, he is forming the 6th and 7th dimension, saying that in the 7th dimension, all things exist in one dimension. That means every single possible reality for all timelines that exist in this timeline. And that's all of us human, everything that you know of exists in that timeline. Even the memory of dinosaurs. You've never met a dinosaur, but it exists in your timeline because we're talking about dinosaurs. The second we focus our attention, there is a line connecting us to thinking about dinosaurs to the dinosaurs. It's pretty kooky when you think about it. All right, so here we go, picking up from the 7th dimension.
When we describe infinity as being a point in the 7th dimension, we're only imagining part of the picture. If we're drawing a 7th dimensional line, we need to be able to imagine what a different point in the 7th dimension is going to be, because that's what our line is going to be joined to. But how can there be anything more than infinity? The answer is, there can be other completely different infinities created through initial conditions, which are different from our own Big Bang. Different initial conditions will create different universes, where the basic physical laws such as gravity or the speed of light are not the same as ours. And the resulting branching timelines from that universe's beginning to all its possible endings will create an infinity which is completely separate from the one which is associated with our own universe. So the line we draw in the 7th dimension will join one of those infinities to another. And as boggling as the magnitude of what we're exploring here might be, if we were to branch off from that 7th dimensional line to draw a line to yet another infinity, we would then be entering the 8th dimension.
So there you go. So not only is this the 7th dimension where, so we started here, this being, this is difficult. See, that's me trying to move through multi dimensions using my brain. Okay. So this dot here is the 7th dimension. This dot below it is still the 7th dimension. It's this connection because this is a whole physical reality of all potential realities that we know. This is all physical potential realities that we don't know. But they are connected. This is why when we talk about heaven and earth, do you know heaven? Well, this is where you can fly. This is where gravity doesn't exist. This is where time doesn't affect you. This is where aliens exist. This is where everything that is not in our reality. I mean, aliens do exist in our reality, but they also exist in a different reality where their whole realities are not intertwined with ours. This is where up is down. This is the rabbit hole. This is where Alice in Wonderland takes place. This is where you take a pill to get bigger or smaller, et cetera, et cetera. But now that sounds kooky, and it absolutely is. But why are there two dimensions yet again for just the 7th dimension? Because that's the same way the first dimension is. The first dimension is 2 points. The third dimension is 4 points. The fourth dimension is 5 points, so on and so on. So to get to the 8th dimension, we have to open up a whole new line. Oh, absolutely. That's a great question. Lauren says, so it is truly is possible to love someone to infinity and beyond. Man, you hit that right on the head. Absolutely. And beyond infinity. It absolutely is possible. And you do. You absolutely do. And somebody just asked me that, or had posted that. My friend Cree, who's going to be on the show soon. Dr. Cree Dye. I'm going to give her a shout out. I don't know if she's on the show or not, but she's a psychologist and a counselor and teaches, I'm not sure what university she teaches at, but she's an amazing woman. I met her at a yoga retreat many years ago. And she asked, why do us guys say, I love you to the moon and back? Because, man, that really ain't far. Like just looking at the moon is to the moon and back. That's it. Just looking at it is to the moon and back. Like if you start to perceive how powerful you are as a being, how far your thoughts go, how far your attention goes, I had a conversation earlier this week where I mentioned, the average person's bubble is about 80 feet because that's about how far they can see clearly. That's it. And I told them, I said, yeah, my bubble is about as big as America is. And I'm working on expanding that to the globe. It's not to take over the globe. It's just where my consciousness hangs out at. I'm thinking about stuff in past 3D. I'm thinking in 5D, past time, future time, different spaces. I can perceive that there's different realities to that. I perceive all of you guys as me. So every person that I know, I feel like my abilities are expanding just because I know you and I'm connected to you. I don't see myself as ending at these fingertips. Just saying. So that's how you perceive yourself. That's how you expand your bubble of perception and creative reality. Yes, you start to get feedback. When you expand your bubble, you'll get information from places you've never experienced getting information from. This is how you expand your thoughts. You get new thoughts from higher levels. Okay, so we're now getting into the 8th dimension here, which is where stuff gets really, really cool. This should absolutely resonate, Lauren. And the reason that it resonates is because you remember, I told you, your consciousness that you're walking around with every day exists in the 8th dimension. We're actually 8th dimensional beings. Now, we get higher than that, but this is where our higher conscious selves exist at above 8 dimensions.
As we've explored already, we can jump from one point in any dimension to another simply by folding it through the dimension above. If our ant on the newspaper were a 2-dimensional flatlander, then folding his 2-dimensional world through the 3rd dimension would allow him to magically disappear from one location and appear in a different one. As we're now imagining the 9th dimension, the same rules would apply. If we were to be able to instantaneously jump from one 8th dimensional line to another, it would be because we're able to fold through the 9th dimension. Before we discuss the 1st dimension, we could say that we first started out with dimension 0, which is the geometrical concept of the point. A point.
Okay, dimension 0. How many people have ever thought of there being 0 dimensions? What? That's your conscious self. That's that's your true, that's God. That's the circle. That's your creator. That's the God that we don't feel connected to, even though we are 100% connected to. And pardon me using the term God if that offends anybody, but that is the all. That's everything. That's before it divides into another dimension. Remember, the dimensions are just to perceive yourself. That's it. It's just one. That's what a dimension is. It's a perception. So when you gain multiple perceptions, you're expanding your dimensions. We call those degrees. That's why when we go to college, we used to always ask in class, like, man, why am I doing all this repetition? Well, the repetition is learning different ways to do the same thing. That's what degrees are. It's the same stuff. That's why you're using all of the things that you learned before it to move ahead. And if you recognize, that's a degree.
Indicates a location in a system, and each point is of indeterminate size. The 1st dimension then takes 2 of these points and joins them with a line. When we imagined the 4th dimension, it was as if we were treating the entirety of 3-dimensional space in a particular state as a single point, and drawing a 4th dimensional line to another point, representing space as it is in a different state. We often refer to the line we have just drawn as time. Then in the 7th dimension, we treated all of the possible timelines which could be generated from our Big Bang as if this were a single point, and imagine drawing a line to a point representing all the possible timelines for a completely different universe. Now, as we enter the 10th dimension, we have to imagine all the possible branches for all the possible timelines of all the possible universes and treat that as a single point in the 10th dimension. So far, so good. But this is where we hit a roadblock. If we're going to imagine the 10th dimension as continuing the cycle and being a line, then we're going to have to imagine a different point that we can draw that line to. But there's no place left to go. By the time we have imagined all possible timelines for all possible universes as being a single point in the 10th dimension, it appears that our journey is done. In string theory, Physicists tell us that superstrings vibrating in the 10th dimension are what create the subatomic particles which make up our universe, and all of the other possible universes as well. In other words, all possibilities are contained within the 10th dimension, which would appear to be the concept we have just built for ourselves, as we imagined the 10 dimensions built one upon another.
Awesome. All right, so, oops, that's not what I wanted. There we go. That's what I want. Okay, so if you're puzzled, baffled, wondering what's going on, is we are talking about time, space, and multiple dimensions. And we just went from the first dimension to the 10th dimension. Now the show says this is about the 11th dimension. He actually mentioned the 11th dimension. That's the 0 dimension. Because what happens is if everything exists in one dot, like you said, there's no other place to go beyond the 10th dimension. Because remember, the 10th dimension was multiple, all dimensions, every possible thing connected to every other possible thing that is connected to every other possible thing. That's just the 9th dimension. The 10th dimension is observing that. So what do you think is then observing the 10th dimension? All things. That's our perception of a creator. That's what we perceive God being, as the thing that observes and sees everything as the creator of all things. That's a sphere. That's a dot. Everything exists within there. There's no devising that. See, drawing a straight line is devising something. That's dividing. You're separating this from over there. That's what time was. Remember, we started with a circle, drew a line straight through it, and that was the first time. That's the sun at 12 o'clock high with a ray coming down. That's when God said, "Let there be light." That was the 3rd dimension. Because that's what created time. Which then created the 4th dimension, which then trickled and created the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th all at the same time. All at the same time. So that's the 11th dimension. That's where your creator exists. Whether you believe yourself as the creator, I don't have to use the word creator, but the oneness, the one, the uno. So the uno controls all existing possible realities. And guess what? None of it is separated. They're all connected. So even at the first dimension is the 0 dimension. The 0 dimension is all other dimensions within itself. All you're doing is perceiving it from a different dimensional state. So keep increasing your perspective and you'll become your 10th dimensional self, your 11th dimensional self as the creator. That's why Abraham Hicks or Esther Hicks, Seth, all these people who auto-tune into other consciousnesses are coming from a higher dimension. These are consciousnesses that exist outside of your body. They're real. And they are certainly capable of talking to people at a lower dimensional state. Now, they are talking through different timelines. So you may have to get one word 5 minutes ago and then get another word 6 minutes later. Well, guess what? The Earth has moved 10,000 miles in that short period of time. So somebody trying to talk to you from time and space might have to put one word in a magazine and the other word on the television, even though it's just one coherent sentence. And that's why you don't see things so simply. But some of you guys that are out there that are as kooky as me, I use the word kooky because I don't mind it, start to see what we call synchronicities. And that's when we start to get information from multiple places at the same time. And we're like, wow, look at these synchronicities. Yeah, that's our consciousness talking to us from a higher level of consciousness. You start to perceive it. You start to see signs everywhere. Of course you do. But that's because it can't just give you a sentence on a piece of paper and tell you that it is because it would not be coming from your higher conscious self. It would be coming from your lower conscious self because it's just 2D paper. Your 4th dimensional self has to talk to you in 3-dimensional space. Your 5th dimensional self has to talk to you through time. The 6th dimensional space has to talk to you through time, space, and perception. your seventh dimensional self or your Akashic record, you are not capable of perceiving in your body. This is where meditation comes in, when you get out of your body. This is where your consciousness, when you dream, this is why when you dream, it can be weird. That's because your conscious self is perceiving yourself in a higher dimensional state. All of them are real. All of them exist. And we all exist within them. So Lauren says, so that's what we perceive as signs. Absolutely. The signs are just information coming from a higher dimensional state. Now, I don't like the word to say just, as if this is the only way. You have to understand, in these potential states, whatever you believe it to be, so if you believe in witchcraft, if you believe in demonology, if you believe in angels, if you believe in, all of that stuff's real, because that becomes a dimension of potential reality. This is why you should be very careful about what you put into your space and time, what you think about, because you're creating a reality that has rules set up based off of your beliefs. But guess what? There's a whole nother dimension that has nothing to do with your beliefs that's just as real. This is why arguing with people is almost pointless. It's from their point of view, they're right. Guess what? Even though they may be wrong in yours because of your rules and laws, but I can show you on a math pad exactly right now how 1 + 1 = 3. Lauren says, yes, dreams, oh my God, ones that come true make sense. Well, so you say they make sense because you are now perceiving them in time. When you take away time, almost everything doesn't make sense in the physical world. But that's the thing is, the funniest thing is when you leave your body, when you have it doesn't just, when I say leave your body, I don't mean dying. I actually mean just take your consciousness and move it up to a higher dimension. And that's what we do when we meditate. Is we become conscious of our higher selves. So Brahmins talk about chakras, and I think they say there's 143 chakras in the body, and I think there's 112 chakras in the body and like 143. There might be more. Somebody give me an exact number if you know. But the point is, we all talk about the little 7 chakras starting from red going to purple. Yeah, okay, well, those are major nodes. Those aren't actually the only chakras. But each one of those is actually just a higher state of perception within a bigger state of perception. Like having a sandwich. You have multiple pieces of meat and multiple pieces of cheese and multiple pieces of lettuce, but it's still the lettuce layer. Same thing. You can gain perception in those. So the Brahmins understood that, and Hindus and Buddhism and all that, they all kind of fall into the same area of thought, of understanding that each of these, when your consciousness, they call it Kundalini, where your consciousness goes up the chakra ladder. They also talk about a Jewish mysticism, same thing. They call it Jacob's ladder, the seed of life, and all these other different things. It's where energy flows up in a DNA, what looks like a DNA pattern or a snake pattern. Kind of have it right here. Is that your higher self is going up consciously. And you can do it and perceive quite a few of them in your body. And when you do, to others, the way they perceive it is you look like you have superpowers. Because they get little glimpses of you doing things that don't normally exist in their reality. Sometimes they call them miracles. So Lauren says chi. So I believe so chi is actually still a lower state of energy. It's where it exists. It's the base of all energy kind of thing. It's a buildup of spirit energy. So the consciousness exists at a higher state than chi does. Remember, consciousness exists as high as to the level of God or your creator or the oneness of all things. Chi is still a perception of reality of energy, which means you would have to perceive it in a specific dimension. It loses sense of what it is when we get rid of language. You wouldn't call it chi anymore. You would just call it energy. All energy is just energy. You can call it all different things, but those are just different perceptions of energy and different states. Different states just means you're perceiving it from different dimensions. Something in motion is perceiving it from a dimension higher than the state of it not moving. You think a car that is parked outside is not moving? It's still moving. It's moving rapidly. The whole planet is moving. Everything is in motion. Everything that you know of physically is in motion. The things that seem like they're moving are generally in slower state of motion. But this is what relativity is. Einstein not only talked about this. He proved this. And, science, all of science today is based off of it. And, guess what? Einstein was a spiritualist. He was very much into spirituality, and he knew very much that his work was just a scientific way of showing that time and space are not exclusive of each other, and they operate in different places in different time. Light is not a constant. We've talked about this before. Light is not a constant. It does not move at a specific speed. It does in a vacuum, but guess what? There's not a vacuum everywhere. But also, guess what? In other dimensions, vacuums don't even exist. Or the vacuum's stronger than it is here in time, and you can hold light in a particle. Guess what? Light exists in a particle and a wave. So that means in a particle, you can just move at this. If you could move at the same speed of light, so when you think light is moving really fast, you could literally move at the same speed, and that particle would just sit in between your fingers. And that would be all the light that exists, because the next particle's 1,000,000 miles away. So you would be the God being that could hold a sun in their hand in your dimensional state. Like when we perceive movies, when we, it all trickles down. This is why we have movies that look like that, where we have gods doing crazy things, and or people having superpowers, creating flames out of their hands, or flying. Like, those are not realities that don't exist. Those are realities that you don't perceive in this lower dimensional state. There are people. This is why there are people flying everywhere in a higher dimensional reality, in another dimension that you don't exist in. So when you start to open and expand your consciousness and start to perceive things that you'll start to see that there's some reality based in, and even in the reality that you existed where they didn't exist, you will see how they kind of did. You want new technology? Open up. Guess what? That technology will show up in your reality. This is what manifesting is. It's basically you're appealing to your higher consciousness self. It is then saying, okay, well, when I come back to your body, I'm going to be in a different state. And when it comes back down to that state, that thing now exists in your reality. That's how all creation exists. I'm going to give you guys one more perception of your reality, of our reality, that kind of will show you how all potential reality, and I've mentioned it before, but now it'll make sense because we've exhausted all 11 dimensions. That's the 0 point dimension as well as the 10 dimensions that science knows of. So imagine, we talk about the Big Bang from beginning to end as if the universe expanded from one point, and we have proof that it's expanding. It's called the Schumann Resonance. That's what static is when you turn on your television back in the day and you just saw the black and gray and white. That's a resonance. Your antenna is picking that up because it's everywhere. And it's called the Schumann Resonance. A guy named Schumann discovered it. So it shows, if we were to map that digitally, we could understand that everything is expanding. But recently, scientists have started to recognize there's also another frequency, like the Schumann Resonance, that is proving that the universe is contracting, meaning getting smaller. If it's getting smaller, that means that it reached its endpoint and then started contracting, meaning that all existence will end at one point. Just like it began at one point and is going out infinitely. Well, guess what? That's exactly what's happening. The universe is expanding and contracting, and expanding and contracting, and expanding and contracting. And that means everything in the universe is being created, then destroyed. Created, then destroyed. And you exist in that singular point where it all comes back to and where it all starts from. That's where your consciousness exists. That is your consciousness. That is your creator. And in that process, it happens so fast that you could never perceive it. Everything around you is being created and destroyed in minuscule amount of time. That means everything that you know is created, but then it comes back. But your consciousness says it wants to be to the next closest frequency that you existed at. So if you want $1 million and you hold that enough, when the universe is recreated next time, you are coming closer to the reality of being a millionaire. My hand is here. In this reality, I don't actually move. What happens is my consciousness comes back to a reality where my hand is over here. This one was destroyed. It still exists because it exists in its timeline. So all potential possible realities you have the ability to connect to. And you do. Every second that you are living, you're actually coming back as a new person. So if you don't believe in reincarnation, every second you're alive is a reincarnation. You are dying and being reborn constantly. Your consciousness comes, your movement is proof of that. Guess what? Quantum physicists know this all along. That's why they laugh at us all the time. They know what their power is. They know how powerful they are. They know what they can do with their mind. It's the secret, man. That's what it is. That's what the law of attraction is. It's the universe is being created and destroyed, and you can pretty much have anything you want. But the thing is you still exist from the potential reality that you were at last at. That's the frequency. So you come back with a frequency that you are tuning into yourself. So you are connecting to the frequency you last held. So if you can imagine, this is what the shape of an hourglass is, right? I don't have a graphic for you, but an hourglass, the lower half is yourself that's here. Then you were destroyed, come back to the little tiny point, and then you're recreated. The top part is very similar to the bottom part, but they're not the same. That's your movement. That's a wave. That's what all energy is doing. That's how you exist. When you come to that little single point, you're a particle. It's all physics, all science, all chemistry. There's no argument. Why? Because it all exists within what we're talking about. It's infinite power, man. It's infinite perception. All ideas that you've ever had or ever will have or everybody all exist. You want to take credit for something? Great. But guess what? It's not yours. It's all of ours. We exist where we're all the same person. Now, you can perceive yourself as one in yourself in a sea of infinite people. That's why you exist in a fourth dimensional and fifth dimensional state. Perceive yourself in a sixth dimensional state. You start to see everybody else as being connected to you. Perceive yourself in the seventh dimensional state. You perceive us all as one. You recognize that all energy is connected to you. Perceive yourself in the eighth dimensional state, and you realize that all potential realities that you could be connected to are also connected to you. Meaning that you could go anywhere, do anything, be anything, imagine anything, have anything, create anything. Guess what? I have many times created planets, ecosystems, people, all kinds of things in my mind. All kinds of things. I've visited different planets. I've created planets. I've created science projects and industry and politics and tried different scenarios just to see what could happen. Does that make me a creator? Of course it does. Does it make me a dreamer? Sure it does. Does it make me kooky and weird? Yep, I'm all of that. From a fourth dimensional state, looking at me, thinking and talking about that, I sound like I'm crazy. But if you were in your eighth dimensional self looking down at me, you'd be like, man, let's do more of that because I am that too. We are the same person doing the same thing. And by doing so, I'm expanding your reality. I'm giving you more things to play with, more shows to watch, more places to go, more love to receive, more beautiful sceneries to experience. We're all doing that for each other as we expand our realities. If you're just walking around a two-dimensional self, remember, that guy's walking on a flat piece of paper, which we call a Mobius strip, taped to the other side, and he's walking in a circle and will never realize it. He's doing the same thing he's done all his life. And there are plenty of people on the planet that do that. And guess what? They're okay. That's okay. You were once that person too. And if you go low enough, you'll become that person too. If you allow your consciousness to go to that lower state, you'll be happy to walk around in a circle. We call those sheeple, right? I mean, it's kind of rude that we call them that. There's nothing wrong with them because they are your lower conscious self too. So treat them kindly because remember, they are you. So what do you guys think? Anybody got any questions, concerns, thoughts, anything to add? Right? See, there's some people still hanging out with me and recognizing that, yeah, this is Man, we just went from the first dimension. We went from 0 dimensions to the 10th dimension and back again. And I showed you how you can manifest your best self, your highest reality, connect with the Akashic Records, connect with everyone. And guess what? If you start to play with it, whether you believe it or not, if you start to play with it, you'll be like, wait a minute, I can access this stuff. This stuff is real. This guy, everything I've ever said to everybody that's ever met me has always come back to me. I mean, so many people, I get so many messages, sometimes not every day, but weeks and months where people come back. I'm like, man, you were talking the truth. Like, and when I say the truth, it's not, I don't just mean from my perception of it. It's just what I'm saying is they found out for themselves what I was sharing with them was real for them too. Not just for me. I'm not, you guys know that I'm not just sitting here blowing smoke up your ass. This is, awake and aware. I came from the streets, and here I am sitting here sharing with you guys in technology. This technology didn't exist when I was a kid, but here it is. But guess what? I dreamed about doing this when I was a kid, and here I am. It was an idea first that came from my higher consciousness self. For some reason, I started using the terminology awake and aware constantly. I used it all the time about all kinds of different things. And then next thing you know, I own an Awake and Aware magazine, a newspaper. Oh yeah, let's talk about that. I got an Awake and Aware newspaper. It's awkawr.com. Check it out. It's nothing but conscious content. It's just good stuff. awkawr.com. Just launched it last night. That's why I'm a little, haven't slept a whole bunch this week. But sleeping allows you to get in touch with your higher self. So you can realign. So you're not all effed up. So you're not walking around in the same circle. This is why you get a new day every day when you go to sleep. Otherwise, you would do the same day over and over again. When you start to perceive these higher dimensions, man, everything will start to make sense. It's like, oh, this is why this is. And hopefully you have a good laugh about it. You know, like I have a good laugh, you know, when I connect with my higher dimensional self. I'm like, man, those problems really weren't problems, man. They were just silliness that I got entrapped in because I didn't want to do all the things I needed to do to cleanse myself. I didn't know how to meditate yet. I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't washing my body. I wasn't doing the things that I needed to do to elevate my consciousness to a higher state. I was staying stuck down in my lower self and just experiencing the same stuff over and over again every day. I would get drunk, then get drunk again. Then I would get high and then get high again. Even though most of the time I knew I didn't like the outcomes, I still did it because I didn't know any better. I couldn't see any other direction to go anywhere else. And then by happenstance, I just kind of tripped on something that brought me into my higher dimensional self. I got into the 5th dimension to see the 4th dimension. And I was like, what? There's synchronicity there. There's 2 things happening at the same, actually it was 3 things happening at the same time. They were all doing the same thing. Then I started catching other people's thoughts. You know, most people who hang out with me, they're like, man, are you reading my mind? Well, no, I'm reading I'm connected to you. I am your mind. You are my mind. I exist in your mind. You exist in mine. We're creating each other. That's how this reality works. We're those 2 dots. But then if you recognize our higher consciousness self goes out from our 2 points out to that 3rd point, and we are that. So every time we go into a higher consciousness self, all of us have to remember that we are something more than ourselves. So when we say we're one, you're over there, I'm over here. But when our higher consciousness, we're all the same higher consciousness. And you know how many religions are based on that? All of them. They just say it in different terms, in different words. You know, it's sad that they war with each other, but that's because they're stuck on lower dimensional selves. It's so crazy when, you know, there's actually a person over here just shaking this microphone. There isn't. It trips me out that it's doing that. But anyhow, so yeah, man, I think this was a great show. If you guys got any questions, like if somebody wants to call in, let me know. Like I'm not just going to put the numbers up today. Nobody called in last week. My feelings was kind of hurt. But if somebody like to call in right now and discuss any of this, I'm gonna put the number up. I'm open for some questions and thoughts about this. You don't have to call in, but if you do, I'll take a call. I'm not putting this out on the podcast because this would be impossible for people to understand reading out on the podcast. I'll do another podcast this week to keep the podcast a weekly show going on. So don't look for this episode on podcast, but it will be available on YouTube. So while I'm waiting for people to call in, I just want to take a second and so I talked about Awake and Aware, AWK, So first off, our website is awakeandaware.com, AWK, the letter N, aware. because there's no ampersand in websites. So awakenaware.com is where you can get this really cool merch, right? So we do got merch. And let me just show you some of that right now. Like, take a look right here. So you can get this shirt right now, 25, this sweater, this hoodie, 25% off. All you got to do is use the code HOOD25, HOOD 25, right? So you can get one of these Awaken Aware sweaters. A lot of people ask me about it, like, man, I want one of those. And guess what? It also comes with free shipping, so you don't have to add the, like, oh man, that sweater's a lot. Man, no, it's not. Go buy it somewhere else. It's more expensive. Now you got to pay shipping on top of it. Plus you're getting 25% off right now. It's super soft. It's super warm. And you let people know that you're awake and aware, which means you're conscious. This is, listen, everything that I create, I put consciousness at higher levels in it. The angles, the opacities, all the levels use certain numbers of frequency, of vibration. Everything I create is high vibrational. So just owning one, I'm not going to tell you owning one of these is going to bring you to higher dimensions. But guess what? Owning one of these will bring you to a higher dimension. It's what it's all about, man. Like these threefold flames, man. It's like mind, body, spirit. It's what it is. It's what awake and aware is. It's conscious. The definition of consciousness is awake and aware. So think about that. If you want to be awake and aware of your surroundings, that means elevate your consciousness to the next level. See, may seem difficult to do from the lower levels, but that's where we talk, like, that's what yoga is. Yoga helps you do that. Yoga helps to bring your body into a state where you can hold position for a long time to then meditate. It opens up space in different dimensions. The different patterns that you make bring you into different dimensions in different space and time, and allow your mind and consciousness to come into a line to access higher dimensions. You don't have to do yoga. You really don't. But again, just want you guys to know that this hoodie is available at awakenaware.com, and it has free shipping. Remember, use HOOD25, HOOD 25, and you get 25% off. Or hurry up quick before that code doesn't work anymore, but it'll be around for a while, for the rest of the month. You can get one of these sweaters. They come in different colors. And as I have different color, the purple has sold out. You can't get a purple one. I don't even have a purple one of these. So, like, that's on my list, is to get a purple Awake and Wear hoodie, because it is dope. But right, there are other colors right now, so you don't have to get black. You can get pink, you can get blue, gray, different colors. They exist. And we got all kinds of other merchandise there. And also we have coffee. Like, we have some of the best coffee in the world. Organic coffee, sustainable coffee, from 19 different places. And it's fresh roasted coffee delivered directly to you. Why is that important? Why is it important to be fresh? Imagine getting it. So normally, within a month or two, it no longer has the oil on it. And that's what normally, like if you buy in Folgers, that's what you're drinking. There's no oil in that. It's dry. Coffee is not dry. It's covered in oil. And that's where all the goodness, that's where all the flavor exists. Like, you've never had real coffee if you've never had fresh roasted coffee. Like, it's amazing. And we deliver it to you. And we roast it. We grind it in all the popular grind types. So you can get coarse, whole, drip, fine, espresso. And we roast them at different levels. And we have some amazing coffee. So if you're a coffee drinker, I'd say get you some. And we got plenty of other stuff too. But it's all, the whole idea is just stay conscious. Like, you know, I like to say consciousness has a look, and it's awake and aware. And I want you guys to be out there representing your conscious, staying in your higher conscious state. Because as you do that, that's where you have your psychic abilities. That's where you have strong intention. That's where you're creating your best self and creating realities that you want to live in, versus being in doubt, fear, lack, worry, et cetera, et cetera. You're now in abundance, prosperity, wealth, serendipity. I like to use the term serendipity. If you guys don't know what it means that where things happen to you in a good state that you weren't expecting, right? So don't we all want more of that, right? We kind of think of those as miracles. Serendipity is like having miracles happen to you. But they're in your favor. They're not just miraculous. They're always in your favor. You know, auspiciousness, you know, like where everything is just wonderful and aligned for you. Well, guess what? Create that reality. But to do so, you have to do it from your higher dimensional self. Otherwise, you're walking around in realities that other people have created, you've created in your past with your lower dimensional self. You have to do the work. How do you get there? Well, here, I'm going to give you one. Before I go, I'm going to give you guys a tool to elevate your consciousness. Super easy. Super easy. This doesn't require money. This doesn't require you to buy my book. This does not require anything but for you to be there with yourself and just kind of use your own perceptions. And it's super simple. I gave this one to my mother a few years ago to help her when she was in a tough time. And she had lost her eyesight. My mother has her eyesight back. I'm taking these numbers down. It didn't seem like anybody wanted to call in. So I used a loaf of bread, something that we both had. I had a loaf of bread in the room and she had a loaf of bread in the room, and there was a loaf of bread on the table. And I asked her to perceive the loaf of bread. So this is how we go through our chakra states, but this also takes your consciousness to a higher level. Because the first thing you think about a loaf of bread and say, oh, I could eat that. I could make something with that. I could make a sandwich right now and feed myself with that. Well, that's perceiving it in a lower dimensional state. There it is on the table. Actually, excuse me. The first dimensional state or the second dimension would be saying that it's there. You see it in its length. But if you turn your head and look at it more, you see the other way. Now you're perceiving it in the third. That's it. Just look at it from a different perspective. And that is literally just physically moving yourself from one point to another point to perceive something in 3 dimensions. Guess what? As you're perceiving that thing, you're now perceiving it in 2 different dimensions. That's super easy. But what you've done is elevate your consciousness. Now you've created momentum because you've elevated your consciousness now to be easy to perceive the third one. Now get above it or beneath it and perceive another dimension. So you had to move 3 times to perceive those first 3 dimensions. Each one of those times you're now connecting through your memory banks because each one of those was at a different time. You perceived it going down, last, right, left. Each one of those existed in a different time and space. And the connection to you is through your memory. And that's how you age. But not a lot. Well, you're all living. So now you're in the 4th dimension. Now you are perceiving 4th dimension as time. Now, if you look back at yourself, having thought of perceiving it from each one of those places, think about yourself when you were sitting down in the chair looking at it, when you got up and looked at it, when you looked at it from above. If you can perceive yourself doing all 4 of those things at the same time, you are now in the 5th dimension. You have elevated your consciousness to the 5th dimension. Welcome to the first chakra. Because you are now in the 2nd chakra looking downward in the 1st chakra. That's what the 1st chakra realm is all your perceptions of your physical self. That's it. That's all it is. So all things that exist in the physical world, that is sex, that is death, that is life, that is physical things, physical aspirations, strength, weakness, touch, senses. All of your senses actually work via touch, just a FYI. Your nose is when something actually touches the sensors in there, right? So when you smell, your eyes are actually when you touch light, and everything you're looking at is light, and how light either is absorbed by it or not absorbed by it is touching your eyeball. It's literally touching your eyeball. So you only actually have one sense, and that's touch. It's because everything is connected to you. We all think that we have all these extra senses. We don't. They're just different. So we separate them. And the reason Einstein says the reason that we have time is so all things don't happen at once. So we can perceive things in slices. So now, if you want to step up your chakras, it's about perceiving yourself and other things in its entirety. So thinking about that loaf of bread, you could eat that loaf of bread and you wouldn't have any more bread. Now thinking about making bread starts to bring you to a higher consciousness. But then thinking about bread in itself, what its ingredients are, where was it made at? That starts to bring you into a higher consciousness. You're no longer thinking about yourself when you do that. Because if you think about going to the store, you're still thinking about yourself. But when you think about the loaf of bread and how many other loaves of bread there are, where they come from on the truck, what they're made out of, you're perceiving multiple destinations, multiple time points, multiple places. Your consciousness starts to connect to all of those points, even though you don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about it in depth. You don't have to use all your brain power, but just start to perceive it. And we've done this in maybe 5 seconds to go through these little steps. What you've done is you've elevated your consciousness now. Again, you've created momentum, which will allow you to roll into a higher definition of appetite, or recognizing, will I have bread tomorrow? See, that's a higher consciousness state. So if I don't eat the whole loaf of bread today, I can have some tomorrow. Right? Perceiving whether or not the bread will go bad when it goes bad. That's elevating your consciousness state. As you're doing this, you're perceiving things that aren't existing in your reality. Just looking at the time and date when it expires and thinking about, man, if this gets moldy, if I don't eat it between now and then, I've got to eat this by Tuesday. That's elevating your consciousness to a higher state. When you start to think about, if you stopped and thought about bread feeding everybody in the world for the existence of the time that bread exists, when I think of sourdough bread and how that was all that people could eat in 400 BC, because we couldn't consume wheat without milling it and using an enzyme to break down the shell, which is how we made sourdough bread with yeast. We couldn't eat anything else. All other breads would really hurt us. Thinking about that is elevating my consciousness. My consciousness just jumped to 400 BC. See, now I'm perceiving myself in a different time and place. And it's when I say myself, because the person eating that bread is me in a different state, because my consciousness can go there. I am my consciousness. I am not my physical body. I am wherever my consciousness can go. So when you start to perceive that and start to remember that that is yourself, that's where remember, you are your consciousness. You are not yourself. How do you know that? Because you can observe. You ever hear a voice in your head? That's not you. Most of the time, most of your life, you'll spend thinking that voice in your head is you. But who's listening to the voice? You're the person listening. That's your consciousness. And again, that's not taking place in your head. It's taking place in multiple dimensions. You're actually an 8th dimensional being. So when you keep going through, just like I showed you those little patterns, that video that we watched earlier is called How to Know 10 Dimensions, and it's available on YouTube. You can see it anytime. It's been around for some time. So just remember that, like that you can take. So I got you guys to the 5th dimension. Now, again, recognizing the 6th dimension is recognizing that you go into the 7th dimension, and all you got to do to be in the 7th dimension is start to perceive how everything is all the same, all connected, all the same energy. Ponder that. Just pondering it helps you connect. Now, in this body, you cannot stay in a 7th dimensional state because it's not a 7th dimensional body. It's a 5th dimensional body. But actually, it's all entirety from the beginning of time to your end of time is your 6th dimensional body. Your 7th dimensional body is perceiving yourself as your young person. Think of yourself as a young person. Think of yourself as an old person. If you can do that in just a short period of time, you don't have to spend a lot of time doing that. What happens is you've expanded your frequency and you're starting to act in higher dimensional self. Now you're going to start seeing kooky things in your reality. You're going to start seeing synchronicities. By doing so, it helps you get into the flow. You're now more connected to your higher self. It's that simple. Now, you're not going to stay there because something's going to happen and try to pull you out of it. You know, the microwave will go off, the doorbell will ring, your phone will ring, somebody asks you a question, your new favorite show will come on, and you'll go back to your 2-dimensional self or your 3-dimensional or 4 or 5-dimensional self. But the longer you can stay there is about using, it's not your imagination. It really isn't. It's using your consciousness. What you call your imagination is actually your consciousness. It's your consciousness outside of your body. It's real. It has existence. It has space. It has gravity. Every thought you have creates in this universe. And it has gravity. And it has frequency. And it has vibration. And it creates a reality that matches that thought. That's what we call the law of attraction. I enjoyed that very much. I enjoyed the show. I enjoyed talking with you guys. I appreciate you chiming in and jumping in on the show. So there we go. What's up? Oh, Velmer, what's up, man? Thanks, brother. I'm glad. I didn't even know you were here, man. Thanks for joining in. I hope you got some value out of this. I hope you guys can see where you can connect with your higher selves and create your own higher realities just by pondering our existence at a higher level, by connecting to our higher conscious selves. You recognize that you can do anything. You can be anywhere, go anywhere. And if you want to do that with your lower self, that's fine. Just get in your imagination and play with it. Think about it. Call that our third eye. Remember, you had a third eye. That's so you could see your two-dimensional self. Yeah, man. And then listen, there's other ways to explain the same thing I did. We can talk about them as being sound, light, right? Gravity or matter, et cetera, et cetera. But they're the same thing. That was just one way of looking at the same thing. All right, man, it's been a blast. I'm going to check out here, man. I really enjoyed the show. I want you guys to have a wonderful night. Go ahead and roll these credits. And it's been a wonderful night. Thanks a lot. I'm up.
We start with a point. Like the point we know from geometry, it has no size, no dimension. It's just an imaginary idea that indicates a position.